So this next one is a bill in Florida which would make it legal to kidnap trans children, right? So I'm going to just pull this over here and we're just going to take some time and actually read this. This is a Vice article I found, and it is pretty fucked up. So let's make this a little bit bigger. I'll put this down in the thing for you guys that, I guess it's only me and you, Lantern Light, but if anybody else joins, if you want to read that later, that's the link. Vice News, new bill could legalize kidnapping trans teens by their parents. So I figure we should just read this together because it's pretty frickin' messed up. Okay, new bill in Florida could let parents take their child from their other parent or cross state lines if the child is receiving gender-affirming health care. Right? Newly introduced bill in Florida could let a parent kidnap their children and bring them across state lines if the parent believes that the child is receiving gender-affirming health care or even if the child is simply at risk of getting health care. I wonder how they determine that, you know. Excuse me, need to burp. Okay, thank you. A court may not treat a person's normal... Court may not treat a parent's removal of a child from another parent or from another state as unjustifiable conduct or child abuse, reads the bill, introduced Friday by Republican State Senator Clay Yarborough. The bill would also let any court step in to determine custody if a child is getting gender-affirming health care, and it would block any public agency from spending money on gender-affirming health care, leaving people who depend on the government for help affording this care to fend for themselves. Yeah, a transphobic parent could kidnap their trans child in violation of custody agreements and abscond to Florida and be protected by Florida law under this despite likely committing felony kidnapping in their home state. Alejandro Caraballo, clinical instructor at Harvard Law School's Cyber Law Clinic, tweeted of the bill. Speaking of all the bills targeting trans folks now swirling through Florida's state legislature, Caraballo added, this is a full elimination of recognition and limitation on access to care for all trans people, including adults. So, first off, it makes it legal to kidnap a child. All right. And take them across state lines if that child is receiving trans-affirming care. Now, I'm sure I don't really need to elaborate so much on how this is not only completely 100% unconstitutional and should be overturned in any rational timeline, but how this can be abused a lot. Because you notice it doesn't say that they have to be receiving gender-affirming care. It doesn't say that they have to be receiving that. It says they have to be at risk of it, right? How do you prove if a child is at risk of it, right? Does that mean if your child's gay? If your child is non-binary? If they, if you catch your child, your male child wearing lipstick or, something like that, makeup, nail polish, maybe if he has long hair, maybe if your female girl child cuts her hair short or something like that, or is just a little too tomboyish, is that how you decide if they're at risk, right? How do you prove if they're at risk? Do you just send them a text message or something? Photos, right? I mean, how, what's to keep a parent from just kidnapping their kid? And then what happens if they're wrong, right? What if the parent, is genuine and actually thinks their kid is at risk of being trans, kidnaps their kid, absconds to Florida, turns out the kid is not trans at all, never was, right? So what, that parent, do they go to prison then for kidnapping? Because the law wouldn't shield them anymore, right? So, because it's illegal to just, if you're divorced, for example, and you're sharing custody of the kids. Maybe, you get them 3 days a week and then she gets them 4 days, or maybe you just get them on the weekends or some shit. And then you take the kid on your day that you have them and you just bail, go to Florida, right? That you will go to jail for that. That's kidnapping, right? You broke, because custody is sort of something that's determined by the court. It's like a court order, right? So you have to do that. You don't have a choice. Like if you have your kid and then, unless the court makes allowances for you to like skip days or some shit, like you have to take them that day, right? There has to be like, it's not like optional, So if you take off with the kid, like that's a jailable offense. So what happens if you like say live in like Tennessee, for example, or I'm not even going to choose a blue state. What if you live in Alabama, right? And your significant other bails with your son because she saw him putting on nail polish one day or something, right? And then what are they not allowed to go get them? Right? Are the police in Alabama not like? Will the police in Florida stop the police in Alabama? Or kidnapping over state lines is like a federal crime, so the FBI would get involved. So would the police just be like, "That's not a crime here," and prevent the FBI from like going in and like rescuing the child and arresting the freaking kidnappers? It doesn't work like that, right? It's sort of like if I said, okay, if I lived in Nevada, right, and I said, okay, murder is now legal here. And then if you murder somebody in Utah and then you fly to Nevada, it's not like suddenly you're not going to go to jail because it's not legal. No. Doesn't work like that, So that's why like this thing will 100% unconstitutional in every way that you can think of, right? But we can't rely on the courts anymore. Like in a rational universe, right, where we actually had rational people who were using precedent and established law to make their judgments in the Supreme Court, I would say yes. Yes, we could rely on them, right? We could, but we cannot rely on the Supreme Court anymore because the Supreme Court is filled with ideologues who make up the law as they go along, right? And they have been, Roe v. Wade getting overturned was not the only time that they just completely made some shit up to fit their political agenda, right? And they'll do it again. That's the thing, they'll do it again. So if this were to go up to the Supreme Court, there's a chance the Supreme Court might actually uphold it, right? As ridiculous as that seems, they might actually decide to uphold it. So what the hell happens, right? In this situation? I mean, this is, when they talk about clown world, I mean, I know when they say clown world, that's like a right-wing, alt-right sort of dog whistle thing, but this is the real clown world. Like, when conservatives run shit, it's like the world is being run by clowns. Right? I mean, and then you have this other thing where it would say it would block any public agency from spending money on gender-affirming care. Any public agency at all. Right. So that means prisons. So currently right now, if you go to prison and you're trans, I think in most states, they have to give you the because it's considered medication. You have to get your hormones and stuff, right? And I know that there's a fight over that too. So this would stop that. So go to prison and then no longer get your gender affirming care, right? It would stop any government employees from receiving, having their healthcare providers pay for gender affirming care, right? I mean, there's all kinds of shit that would happen. It would be so, millions of people, thousands, if not millions of people would be affected by this, absolutely fucking mind-blowing. Jesus Christ. What's constitutional is up to the Republican Party. unfortunately, it seems like that. It should not. It shouldn't be like that, you know. And it wasn't like that for a long time. I mean, you know, there was a time it seemed like in decades past where you could rely on the courts to make the right decision most of the time. You know, it really seemed like right around Ronald Reagan that shit started getting highly politicized, right? And now the Supreme, you know, just the not only the Supreme Courts, but the courts themselves are a joke. You know, just like we were talking about with this abortion pill ban. It's like they went specifically to this judge appointed by Donald Trump, who was an anti-abortion judge specifically in this county, which is apparently that county is like the city where it's at is like 4 hours away from everywhere, right? So it's in the middle of nowhere, right? And they did it there on purpose because it's hard to get to. So people, if like protesters and stuff wanted to come, they'd have to drive 4 hours minimum in order to get there, right? And then they tried to hide the court date and not like, you know, publicize it so that nobody would know about it, right? It's like the fact that they can do all of this shit and they're like so highly organized that that's fascism in action. It's Christofascism is what we're looking at in action, right? It's fucking ridiculous. Lantern Light. Go to prison due to moral degeneracy. Get forcibly detransitioned. I would not doubt if that was part of the plan. Now, I haven't really heard anything about that specifically, but I really would not be surprised if that was the plan. Is that, you know, they would force people to detransition by throwing them in jail, and then, you know, and this is how it would work, right? It would work as you would get thrown in the prison where your gender that's assigned to you at birth, you would get thrown in that prison. So if you're a trans woman, you get thrown into a men's prison and vice versa. Then they would cut the care so that, you know, you wouldn't get your hormones and shit anymore, and basically force you to detransition, force you to, you know, live as your prior gender that, you know, and you wouldn't have a choice. And I really think that, you know, that's probably something that they've thought of, you know, and that might be the idea, right? I mean, it's fucking fascism, man. I don't know. Lantern Light, we are 5 laws or less aware from it. You mean away from it? 5 laws or less away from it? Most likely, yes. I think this may be a big fight that's coming in the future, right? You know, because it seemed like they're doubling down on the anti-trans stuff. Like, you'd think that after it lost them the election last time, that they would, you know, back off from it a little and go with something a little more tried and true, you know. But it seems like they're doubling down on, you know, because usually this is what happens every time the Republicans or the conservatives want to piss people off. They usually talk about immigration, you know, or terrorism. They talk about those two things, right? And I think they are doubling down on the trans thing because those other issues they're just not doing it anymore. You know, they're not pulling in the same kind of numbers. They're getting diminishing returns on their outrage. You know, and especially abortion. They don't. You notice that the right wing never talks about abortion anymore. Ever. You never hear them talking about abortion, right? Because it's like they know it's a losing issue. And even though they won. They got Roe v. Wade overturned, right? And they're still fighting for it. You know, but they don't publicize it. They never run on it anymore. They never debate it anymore. Because every time they leave it open to the voters, it gets withheld or upheld. You know, like you saw in Kansas, right? It went to the voters to see should we outlaw abortion, and it came back like overwhelmingly positive to keep it, right? Even though abortion is now outlawed in Kansas. At least I think it is. You know, did they finally outlaw it in Kansas? I think they did. Abortion, Kansas. Right. Yeah, it looks like all of the clinics are closed, right? It says abortion is still legal in Kansas. However, Kansas bans abortion after 21 weeks. Okay, so you could still do it, but I'm looking at actual Planned Parenthoods closed. Looks like they're all. Looks like there's not a lot of options for people in Kansas. So anyway, that's kind of ridiculous bullshit there. And it's just, just kind of goes to show, like, the depths to which these people will go. Getting back to this story here, this thing about kidnapping your children, it just kind of shows the depths that they'll sink to, where it's like the rule of law doesn't mean anything to these people anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's this is, I mean, if because you would think like this would just be a step too far. You would think you would hear from politicians and pundits and the Ben Shapiro's and shit, and the fucking Steven Crowders and crap. Like, you think that they would talk about this and just be like, okay, that's too much. No, we can't be kidnapping kids. Not a goddamn word. No one said anything about it, right? And it just really shows that these people, this political party that relies on morals, like for their motivation, right? They really don't give a shit about that at all. It's just all lies, because that's what they do. They always paint themselves as we're the moral alternative to the evil, godless commies on the left who would tax you into oblivion and take your baby child and chop his balls off, right? And force everybody to be vegan. Like, we're the true patriot, freedom-loving alternative to that. God and guns and country. And when it comes down to it, like, they don't give a fuck about any of that. No, especially the rule of law. They do not care about the rule of law. Like, they just use laws when they benefit them. And when laws don't benefit them, they throw them away because they're fucking fascists. Right. Missed a couple of your comments here. Due to how a human attention works, you can just overwhelm them with shit to be angry about, so the people are split about what to protest and what to work to stop. Yeah. Unfortunately, that is true. It does seem like there is too much, And that's the thing, right? You can't pay attention to everything. First off, there's too much happening. It's a full-time job trying to keep up with all of the crazy shit going on in the world, right? So, of course, and if you got outraged over every single little story and every single little issue, then that is a quick way to basically, get on the road to a mental breakdown, is what that is, right? You have to take some time once in a while to decompress from all of this, because it seems like, the earth is going to hell in a handbasket. We can turn this off for now. I think we're done talking about this. All right, let me just turn off that window. But it seems like everything is going to hell in a handbasket. It seems like, shit's falling apart every which way you look at it. And bad people are in charge of everything. And if you, especially for people who are political junkies like myself, every day I'm reading stuff, right? And if you don't take some time to put it in perspective, right, it can really wear on your mind. And before you know it, you start getting a little anxious, right? And, it's important to step back and put stuff in perspective and realize that no matter how bad the news is that you hear, right, it's not the end of the world, right? So if you hear some story, like, it doesn't mean that shit is going to, like the world's going to end tomorrow and like Nazis are going to be walking in the streets. Like, no, right? It could eventually get there, and you should take stuff seriously when you hear it, and you should pay attention to things, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean, you have to put it in perspective and not overreact. Because it's very, very easy to kind of, let the bad news sort of take over. And before you know it, you're like fucking losing your mind, right? Like, I really think that's what happens to a lot of conservatives, like especially the people that go crazy and turn into like survivalists, right? They turn into like gun nut like survivalists who are like living in the desert with like 10 years worth of canned goods and like a Geiger counter waiting for the nuclear bombs to drop any minute now. Like, I really think that's what happens to those people. It's like they don't, take the time to put stuff in perspective and relax and realize that it's not, so you hear bad things happening in the news. That doesn't mean that like tomorrow the shit is going to hit the fan, right? And like helter skelter is going to start. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean that the end of the world is coming tomorrow. It doesn't mean that the fascists are going to take over in 5 minutes or whatever. And it doesn't mean that it's hopeless. That's the other thing, right? It doesn't mean that even though there's things like the Supreme Court are corrupt and all this other shit, and we've got all these crazy people running things, right? Crazy people and criminals like Matt Gaetz and shit, like running stuff, getting political power and personally enriching themselves at our expense. Like, just because that's happening doesn't mean that it's hopeless, Not yet. It may actually hit a point where that happens, and who knows then. You can then it comes to you have to make a choice. Are you gonna fight or flee? Hopefully I'll be too old by the time that happens, right? And I think that may happen at one point. I really do think that the United States is not going to outlive me, right? At this point, that looks that's too shiny. I was trying to put like a little like highlights on here, but that's a little too much highlights. We can erase some of that. I really do think the United States is probably not going to outlive me, though. I think that's going to happen. I think within the next 30 to 40 years, the United States is going to collapse. It just will. And, when that happens, then God help us all. Right? I think it will cause international chaos. Like, like remember when the Soviet Union collapsed and it was like, shit hit the fan, but it was not really a big deal. We weren't really affected over here and all. No. I think that the United States collapsing at the very minimum will cause a global depression. And, which, may ultimately be, I don't know. I wouldn't know what to expect after that point. But I'm hoping that we can delay that as long as possible. Because who the fuck wants to live through that shit? Anyway, so yeah. Lantern Light, I've been paying less attention to every political thing happening because my mental health is pretty decent at the moment, and I'm trying to keep my head above water. Been focusing on my own physical mental health and my job and using video games to wind down. But I don't know if this is conspiratorial or not, but I think it's just going to keep pushing until they force a revolution attempt, which will fail because we aren't ready and we're too split on it. Yeah, I think at one point, I don't think there will be like a civil war or a revolution, really. If that were to happen, it would come from the right wing, obviously, right? And I think it would be more like terrorism. You know what I mean? Like, it'll be more like sort of terror cells doing things like hijacking stuff, trying to like blow up rail lines and like kidnap people and stop food shipments from going to cities, that kind of thing. I think we will see that sort of thing, but I don't think there will ever be like a full scale revolution, like, you know, not in this country. I think too many people would turn on them, like the minute that they started hurting civilians, because you can't do a revolution like that without hurting civilians, right? And you can't win it without getting the general populace on your side. And when you already have half of the populace like against you to begin with, it'll never take off. Like all it would take would be like one terrorist bombing that kills a lot of civilians, and they'll turn on them in a nanosecond. I don't think the average American citizen has like any gumption at all to live through what it would take to overthrow the United States government. I think really all it would take is just electricity going out for a prolonged period of time before people were ready to give up and just be like, ratting on their neighbors and shit. I don't know. Here's hoping that we never actually have to like experience that. I really hope we don't, because it would be bloody, and I also think that the right wing would make very good terrorists. So here's hoping that this is a thing that never actually happens, right? Hello folks, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.